Hey, I'm super. Back in 2017, I wanted to do a long series of reviews of movies from the last 100 years with just one movie a year. Because I'm a big film and history nerd, so it seemed like an idea that really appealed to me and that I could then discuss film history and how that sometimes then relates back to how history in general is. And I was going to start with a movie from 1917 that felt particularly relevant at the time, that's called The Immigrant, which was written and directed and edited by its star, Charlie Chaplin. So I made up notes for this movie. I watched through it a couple of times to get everything kind of down. And then life stuff happened. I shelved the entire idea until I finally got the motivation last year to start actually making some film review videos. But I didn't really have a specific structure to them like this idea had. So I'm starting up this idea again because I remembered it. I'm still going to occasionally do videos that don't really fit into this specific framework, but this gives me a fairly expansive list to draw from when I don't have an idea for a topic for another video to do. It's no longer 2017, so it really isn't 100 years ago from now, but I still kind of want to talk about The Immigrant because I already did notes and research on it, and I just kind of want to do that. So I'm going to just start there, see where that takes us. Some years in film are difficult to choose one movie to talk about, so some of this series is going to discuss multiple films. This one isn't, but just so you know. Sometimes it's going to be something that's popular and well known, because there's some things that it's just undeniable to talk about. Sometimes it's something that you probably haven't seen or heard of unless you're a giant film nerd like I am. Sometimes it might even be a film that I choose because it's one of those that I know about, but I never quite got around to watching, and this gives me an excuse to see more movies. I'll try to be interesting and informative. I will definitely have some weird jokes that I probably think are funnier than you do, because that's just how this works. And I'm going to have fun with it because I like watching and talking about movies. So enough of this explanation, let's talk about The Immigrant. Some brief background history. Charlie Chaplin was born in London and immigrated to the United States when he was about 19. He found himself working in films pretty soon after, and within a few years he was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. The Immigrant was one of his earlier works, but it's very well made for its time. It's a comedic satire, and one of the first times that Chaplin inserted social issues into his work, but it definitely wasn't going to be the last time. And there will be probably other movies that I get to within the course of this series that are about that. So this movie starts with Chaplin's Tramp character on a ship heading to the U.S. full of fellow immigrants. During this part of the movie, a woman is introduced who is also on her way to America with her sick mother. The set is constantly tilting back and forth to simulate the boat rocking erratically, which leads to a ton of physical comedy scenes. It's pretty well done, especially in a bit where the tramp and another passenger have a bowl of food sliding back and forth across a table while they both try to eat from it. The tramp meets this woman on the boat at some point here, and I hate that I have to keep calling her the woman on the boat or just the woman, but she legit doesn't have a name in the credits. There's a thief that steals all of this woman's money from her extremely ill mother while she's asleep. The tramp then wins all of that stolen money from the thief in a card game, but he doesn't know that it's been stolen. But he does find out that the woman had all of her money stolen, so he decides to do a nice thing and quietly slip some of that money back into her pocket anonymously. Unfortunately, he's spotted doing this by a ship crewman who mistakenly thinks that he was taking money from her pocket instead of giving her money. But the woman then clears him and he's freed to go, and she's very grateful. And after that, they arrive in America. The camera shows us a shot of the Statue of Liberty, these huddled masses yearning to be free, gazing upon it in awe from the railing. And as they finally reach this land of opportunity, the immigration officers pull the passengers away from the railing of the ship and rope them off like they're cattle. It's a pretty effective bit of social commentary, I think, especially coming from a recent immigrant who has just been through this sort of experience. It's a definite comedic beat, but as with all good satire, it has some teeth to it. The tramp kicks one of the immigration officers in the ass, which he kind of has coming because they're being kind of rude. He parts ways with the woman and her mother and heads off into the U.S. Interesting side note, Charlie Chaplin was barred from the U.S. during the Red Scare in 1952, and they used this few seconds of film of him kicking an official who was treating him like crap in the ass as some of their proof that Chaplin was un-American, and he did not return to America for another 20 years after that. Back to the film, the tramp goes to a restaurant in New York, but he has no money. This bit was actually the beginning of the idea for the whole movie, the misadventures of a man who has never been in a restaurant going in to eat there and not knowing how to properly behave in society because he's never done this. He finds a coin on the sidewalk as he's walking by the place. He puts it in his pocket and walks in to get something to eat. But there's a hole in his pocket, so it falls out when he goes inside to order the food. Namely, a big bowl of beans, a cup of tea or coffee, I can't tell which, and there's not a lot of dialogue in this silent film, and the second longest piece of French bread I've ever seen in my life. He, by coincidence, runs into the woman from the boat. She informs him that her mother has unfortunately passed away, so he buys her some food too. They watch another man who is unable to pay his bill entirely get the crap kicked out of him by the entire wait staff of the restaurant and thrown out into the street. The tramp gets nervous and starts searching his pockets to make sure he still has the coin, realizes that he does not, at which point a stranger comes in openly displaying the coin that he just found outside on the sidewalk. He gives the coin to the waiter. The coin then falls out of the waiter's pocket, and the tramp tries a bunch of times to grab it from the floor without anyone spotting him do it. When he finally does get the coin and uses it to pay for his food, it turns out the coin was fake all along. So now he's on the hook for 2 plates of food, and just as the tramp is preparing to physically fight the waiter, which apparently was an alternate means of payment in 1917, an artist who was in the place eating asks if Chaplin and the girl will pose for a painting for him. They agree. He offers to pay for their food. Chaplin is like, no, that's okay, but he's essentially just trying to be polite and look cool in front of the lady. Then they go back and forth a few times of, no, I'll pay for your food. No, that's not necessary. But then he refuses the offer a few too many times, and the artist doesn't offer to pay for his bill again like the tramp was expecting and just pays his own bill. When he's paying his own bill, the tramp pockets the tip from the artist's bill and uses it to pay for his own food and the lady's food, and leaves telling the waiter to keep the change, which is kind of a dick move when the money he stole from this guy's tips in the first place. But the waiter's also kind of a real dick to everybody, so I don't know, it's a weird situation. When the tramp and the woman walk by a marriage license office as they leave, he proposes to her and she seems hesitant, like, okay, you seem nice and all, but we just met, kind of thing. But the tramp responds to this by just picking her up and carrying her into the office, kicking and screaming. Clearly the beginning of any solid marriage, and clearly the end of this movie. But seriously, no means no, Charlie. The overall story of the first part of this movie really feels personal to Chaplin, drawing on his own experience as an immigrant trying to make it in a world that isn't always as welcoming as he had hoped. It's not depicted as a rosy situation, but he's still able to mine some comedic, satiric elements from that. There's at the opening, in which we're meant to think that he's hanging off the side of this boat in the middle of the ocean being seasick. It turns out to reveal that he's just been fishing and was just hunched over the side getting fish, which I thought was a fun subversion of expectations, and subversion is something I tend to really love. Obviously, these old silent films are not everybody's cup of tea, but thinking of them in terms of when they were made and the environment in which they happen, it can be really interesting if you're willing to take the time. And speaking of time, this movie is less than a half hour long, as a lot of the movies from this era didn't have that kind of lengthy runtime that we see today, so I personally think that it is worth a watch. Some silent movies don't age well and they're very sloppy, but for his time, Chaplin was very much a perfectionist, which is why he ended up writing, directing, and editing a lot of his work most of the time. So for me, this is pretty compelling. And kind of a fun watch. Thanks for coming to my meltdown. I know this is kind of short, but it's a short movie, and yeah, some of these will be longer depending on how long the movie is and how much I have to say. You can like and subscribe to these. Also, hooray, I got my green screen stuff working, so this should have a fun, interesting background to it.
Or imagine being able to be magically whisked away to Delaware. Hi, I'm in Delaware.
But this video's over, so bye.